Tutorial Tuesday. What we're going to do here is I'm going to teach you how to make this really cool bass tone that I've got. It's a combination of P bass and sub bass. This is just the P bass. I have it dropped an octave with pitch. I also have the note length set at about 1/3 of a second. So if you really want to hold the notes, you can turn that off. After that, we have velocity. If you really want to gain it out, you can get a lot of that rattle and that snap. Without the effects, it sounds like this. It sounds like a DI bass that's run right into the audio interface. And you're playing it with your fingers. After that, I have this effects chain on the P bass. Almost like it's coming out of a tin can. And the way that I've created that, I'm using this dual cab processor. It's basically like an amp simulator. Here is it off. It kind of just adds this like extra growl, a short studio reverb as well. I have this just down to like 5%. Auto filters. And that's with them off. So that could be usable, especially if you dial it down. We don't want any of that low end in there because we're going to be mixing in sub bass. I have those set around 81 Hertz and E2 is 82 Hertz. The next thing here is I have saturation knob by Softube. That's where a lot of that rattle and growl comes from, as if you're playing with an overdrive pedal. And I have a ton of utilities all selected to left because I want this to be a mono signal. And anytime you have a stereo signal, you have a left channel and a right channel, right? Because it's going into two different headphones. And if you duplicate one of those channels to both channels, you're getting the same signal. You know, you have an identical left and right signal. And that's what mono is. So anytime it's identical, it feels like it's coming right down the pipe. It's right down the center. To make sure that none of these plugins are introducing something that's stereo, I don't really know if this P bass is in mono. So what I've done is I've just selected, just take the left channel every time. You could also do that with just the right. I didn't notice any difference between left and right. It might be a mono signal. We might not have any stereo, but this is kind of just a precautionary measure. The low end comes from the sub bass. What's really nice about this is that you have independent mix control over the low end and that rattle. And you can kind of dial it into taste. In order to make sure that with the sub bass you're only getting the lows, I've filtered out everything below 164 Hertz. E is 165 Hertz, E3. We want to make sure that nothing above E3 plays. That's what an E3 is, and then sweeping up through the frequency spectrum. Still some that can kind of get in the way. Everything above E3 is muted. If we switch off this filter, this is what our sub sounds like by itself. And by adding distortion and overtone, you can add some highs. But that can get messy, so what we want to do is cut all that out. And by adding the filter there, even if we have too much distortion, too much overtone, we can just get rid of that completely. So that's the sub part, and this is the P bass part. And what we're going to do is we're going to run them through the same effects chain. And what I have for the effects is another mono selector. Basically, I'm only taking the left channel, so it's mono again. I have an auto filter in case I want to dim this down into the mix. Dim both of them, including the P bass. I'm playing this with a MIDI keyboard down here. After that, I have this plugin called Bark of Dog, which is basically a subwoofer simulator. Here's what it sounds like classic. Here's passive. That's what we want. And over here, we're choosing which frequencies we're like really boosting. Since I want to boost that low E again, we're doing 82 Hertz. So that gives it all like that beef and that presence. Lastly, I'm running it into Cymatics Vortex. It sounds really cool. So a little goes a long way. It's basically an electric bass that's then run through a cabinet or like an amp simulator. You're cutting out all of the low end on this bass. You're adding some rattle and some saturation. And then next you're mixing in a sub bass in parallel, and you have independent mix control over the low and that growl. You're also filtering everything from the sub bass from E3 downward. The P bass is from E2 upward. And then both of those channels go into the same mix bus, which has auto filter if you want it. We've got a subwoofer simulator. And then we have another saturation at the end.